Question number 2 was the most common question. This was asked double-digit times in the survey that I sent to our church family. I think I got 54 responses, and there was over 10 people that asked me this question. Is masturbation a sin? There were tons of variations of this. Some people just asked it flat out. Some people said, I'm single, a strong sex drive. Is masturbation okay? What if I'm not looking at pornography? Then is it okay? Some married people asked it this way. What if my spouse can't have sex for a whole number of reasons? They don't have the desire. There's a pregnancy, a sickness, an accident. Someone said, what if I think about my spouse and I practice masturbation, then I'm not lusting after another person or turning to pornography? It's a hugely important question. I actually remember before I was married, I asked this of the vicar at my church. I can remember where I was having this conversation. Well, I'm engaged already, can you imagine being a vicar, which is an intern to be a pastor, and some kid at your church asks you this question? But it's a really good question. We don't talk about masturbation a lot in church, but it's something that almost every human being has done or thought about. James Dobson, do you know that name? The Focus on the Family guy. It's a real conservative Christianity. He has this great quote. He said, 99% of Christian men masturbate, and the other 1% are lying about it. So exaggeration, but he meant to say this is a real thing that happens to a lot of people, even those who love Jesus attend church. So what's the Bible's answer? Complicated would be my answer to that. In the church, we want to make sure we never add rules to the Bible, right? That's how the Pharisees became the Pharisees. There was a line that God didn't want his people to step over and get hurt. And so the Pharisees would add a rule just to make sure people really didn't step over the line. And then they would add another rule, their rules for the Sabbath, to make sure people didn't work. And when Jesus came along, he would stand right here and he would say, why would you judge me? Because I haven't crossed the line with God's law. And so when it comes to sex, lots of Christian parents and lots of Christian churches, they're really concerned about sex is fiery, so we don't want people to sin. So, we're going to add a law here and then another one there, and we're going to say you can't do these things and that. And so I really want to be careful when I answer this question that I'm giving you, God's answer and not just some man-made bit of advice. So the fact is, the idea of masturbation, the word masturbation, doesn't appear at all in the entire Bible. So we have to kind of rely on some biblical principles to guide us. And I think probably the biggest principle to guide us would be Jesus' words that I quoted before. So Matthew 5, Jesus said, if anyone looks at another person lustfully, they've committed adultery in their heart. So if masturbation was going to happen in some godly way, you couldn't be looking at pornography. You couldn't be fantasizing about another person that you're not connected with. That would be a clear crossing of Jesus' line of lust. There's a woman who's not a Christian last month who was grilling me about our church's view of masturbation. The interesting conversations I have as a pastor. And she said, well, what does your church teach about masturbation? Do you think it's wrong that no Christian can do it? And my response to her said, well, we don't have a strong official teaching on masturbation, but we do on lust, because Jesus said you shouldn't lust after someone in your heart. And she looked back at me and she said, how can you masturbate without lusting? And I thought that was a pretty honest response, right? So it's not a black and white, you can't, but in practice, could a person, reach that point sexually just by thinking about the paint drying on the wall? Would be pretty challenging, right? So I want to have a hard line with lust and just ask people to ask honest questions about masturbation, right? What about the idea, what if you think about your spouse, if you're married? Let's say you're the higher desire partner in the marriage. You're thinking of them, so you're not lusting after someone else's wife. Would that be okay? And my Bible answer to that would be maybe. Maybe. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now, let me read it to you. The Apostle Paul is talking about sexuality in that section. And the Corinthians had questions about how they would use their bodies. And Paul quotes them in verse 12 of 1 Corinthians 6. I have the right to do anything, you say. But Paul responds, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, you say. Paul responds, but I will not be mastered by anything. So here's probably my concern with masturbation. While I couldn't say it's a black and white sinful thing to do, is it beneficial for your marriage, and do you become mastered or enslaved to it? Right? So beneficial, I would ask, God gave us a sex drive to drive us towards loving, serving, and connecting with our spouse. And lots of times, as we talked about in week 2, that's work, right? I mean, I know if I'm going to connect with Kim, I have to love her, serve her, I have to know her, I have to meet her needs. Well, if masturbation is an option for me, that's a pretty easy way to get sexual pleasure without the work. And in a sense, this thing that God designed in my body to drive me towards my spouse, I can circumvent it and just kind of be a little bit lazy and a little bit selfish, right? So I want to be cognizant of that. And then, I've studied a lot on the way the brain works. Some of you know I'm the chairman of a ministry that helps people with pornography. Do you know what happens in your brain when you connect like a sexual experience and going all the way through orgasm? They say the dopamine that's released in your brain is like using crack cocaine. So if I'm, hiding away, going to the shower, locking the door of the bathroom, my brain is training itself to like desperately crave that experience again. My brain is releasing something called epinephrine, which is going to remember when that happened. Oxytocin is released when you have an orgasm, which bonds you to the experience, whether it's a computer screen, just being by yourself in your bed or the bathroom, and like whatever that is. And so when Paul says, I won't be mastered by anything, we have to be really, really cautious when it comes to masturbation, because that will like connect you super, super fast. Right? So I would not like give our church a hard line and say any and all masturbation is black and white, biblically sinful. I would say it's probably really, really dangerous, and if at all, should be used with great caution. I heard one pastor say, what if you're in the military? Just a reason you can't physically connect in the same way. I thought that was one of the more interesting applications of where it might, you could convince me pastorally, but I just be really careful. And if Dr. Dobson is right, sex is forgivable, right? So if you've struggled with that, if you are struggling with that, we have an incredible Savior who cleanses us from every sin. So 1 Corinthians 6 would be my go-to passage for that.